Society for Action. The name of the organization isn't because we're conservative, but we have conservative values, and it was specifically chosen. A society of people with conservative values take action. And there's a quote that's on the back of our business card and all over the place that we do things. It's a Thomas Jefferson quote about action. Action will delineate and define who you are. And that's just a quick explanation of it. It's, our organization started back in 2008 before the Tea Party. We were aggravated, disgusted with what was going on with G.W. Bush. And other founders were livid for the financial market that was going on. And I mentioned this yesterday, my business is marketing and sales and marketing. I couldn't sell an ad to Budweiser because they pulled back their budgets in certain things. And I was working with the Restaurant Association, the New York State Restaurant Association. I was working with architects, and I was working with different groups, and nobody would buy ads. My business dropped 50%, which was a definite kick in the tail end. So we started this organization to have a voice for business people, to have a voice against what was going on with the various different bailouts. And then the Tea Party came up. Rick Santelli had his rant on the mercantile floor, and we just kind of looked at it and went, this is an opportunity to get out values of the Constitution, but also get back community activism. And that's what we got involved with it. I have a title, and I use quotes because my title is, I'm all bottom up. There's no funding for what I do. There's no donations to pay for my salary. When I sit at a meeting, I'm on my time. When I write something, it's my time. My laptop, my phone, everything is my budget and my own monies. I'm the New York State Coordinator for Tea Party Patriots. I'm the New York State Coordinator for Main Street Patriots, which means I'll work with anyone in New York State that would like information, wants to get involved, or get dots connected, whether it be in their community, in my community, or at a national level. That's just me in general, so I'm just going to right away immediately open the floor to anybody, any questions, because it's not really about me or know about something. And I'm a happy mom of two awesome adults that I'm exceedingly proud of, and a grandma.
So we could start by asking you what you think ought to have been done in 2007 and 8 that
2000.
wasn't done.
Oh, geez, Louise. Personal opinion, not Tea Party opinion, and I'm going to always preface it that way because my opinion, the choice of candidates in 2008 were a joke. For the Republican side I'm referring to. I am not going to go near the Democratic choice because I'm a Republican. I'm going to speak for my party's choice, or and that's a joke. My party are the people, the political parties, in my opinion, and I discussed this yesterday. The Democrats and the Republicans do not care about the people sitting in this room. They care about keeping their jobs, keeping their positions, and keeping their pensions, not about what you're concerned with or what your issues are. I think that the GOP wanted to try to continue and perpetuate the G.W. Bush plan, and therefore went to McCain, which was kind of like, let's continue beating the dead horse and see if it'll still get up and run. And it was a terrible mistake. Bailouts. The reason we have the Chapter 13 or bankruptcy positionings is for companies to go there to formulate and correct their mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. Person can go into personal bankruptcy, and they have an opportunity to work their way out of it. And I'm not talking about the write-offs and the ways people use it as a game. But businesses have that opportunity, and I'm not one that believes that the government should be bailing out businesses. I understand there are jobs, there's other aspects involved. Prior to my working sales and marketing. I worked in corporate banking for 20 years in the stock transfer business. And the egregious things that went on in that business, we'll just leave it as, I worked for JP Morgan Chase, and if I need to say anything else, I don't think I need to, just by the snickers and giggles, and it's like, yeah, I work for them. So,
But I hope you're not doing that current publicity.
hell no, forgive my French, I'm sorry, but no. Yes?
Bill Hockhausen.
I know.
I'm really happy to be at this conference. I'm a fan of Hannah Arendt, and when I saw that she was sort of one of the moving energies for this meeting, I was very happy to be here. And one of the things that is stimulating is to hear individual opinions, opinions framed as coming from an individual, as you are doing. But part of what our perspective is in meeting together is to see how individual opinions collect in order to make, to gather power in order to affect public action. So that when you say that you work for a famous bank and there are some reactions, it's not really telling us what it is about working at the bank that affected you in a particular way that would then translate into some kind of action. So that part of the value is to hear how individual reactions translate or fit into collective action or public action. And since you are an individual but also a representative, a member of Tea Party, that's what I would be interested in hearing about, is how is it that Tea Party collects individual experience and then translates that into policy opinions or action.
A little funny statement that we say, and this is anyone who's an organizer. When I say we, it's a collective to every single person who's an organizer. It's kind of like herding cats, okay? Everybody's got an opinion, and everybody wants their 2 cents out there. And it's very difficult. The one thing I've noted with the Tea Party movement, and I've been involved with activism since I was a young girl. My mother was very active back in the 60s. I mean, I graduated in 74 from high school, and in the late 60s I was with my mother in all the events in Manhattan. My mother worked with Middle Eastern affairs and the United Nations. So I had an opportunity to see a lot of different views, which my mother teases me that by being around her, I had to go to the exact opposite of where she was, where we actually have more common ground, which is what I try to say to people here. The majority of Tea Party people, and I'm not talking about specific groups, because within the Tea Party, there are other groups. There's a Christian coalition, there's the Catholic, what I call the Catholic Tea Party, the Christian coalition, the individuals that are pro-Israel, people that are pro this or pro that. These are specific groups under an umbrella, because the Tea Party to me, and what I've seen in the last 10 years is more of an umbrella, where people who would like to see a smaller government with a fiscally responsible idea. And that's kind of like an oxymoronic statement. I know it's an oxymoron, the fiscally responsible government, because they have a spending problem. And as such, that's basically the basic gist. We don't want to see humans left in the streets not being taken care of. We do not want to see any of the horrific, I'm trying to make sure I put this in the correct terms, we don't want to see people hurt, but we also want to see the government with their garbage spending controlled. In other words, forgive me, I'm pointing to you without trying to be rude. You have a friend who's got a business, and there's got a road to be done. Bill's business is going to get in, and they're going to get a lot of good money. Do you ever see the cost of tools for the federal government? You can go buy a hammer at Walmart cheaper than the government gets. because of the way they budgeted in. These are big issues that we are upset over, that we would like to see changed. That's the basic way to give you a quick overview of the Tea Party. As for my experience, the reason we started this organization was bailouts. Remember I said I worked for JP Morgan Chase, they got money. They got away with it. So,
They gave it back.
Well, they
Government
did
made
give
money,
it back.
made
I'm
a
glad they
profit.
did. I'm glad they
As a business
did.
person, you must be happy about that.
I am, but it was just like, what? Restructure yourself. Clean your house before you ask me to come in and fund it. That's basically it. Now, I'm gonna go around the room, so when you're ready to pop in, I'm sorry.
I admit I snickered because I'm a JP alum as well. And I was there almost 20 years. And one of the things I was struck, I saw you on the panel yesterday, and one of the things I've been struck by in my own life, basically in the last 10 years, and in this conference is, now I don't want people to get crazy, the level of agreement that we have. Because what I remember hearing in the office, you know, back at the time of the bailouts was, and I would identify myself as, in some ways center left, in some ways further left. So technically someone could say, no, we're at opposite poles. But the fact of the matter is, what I heard from everyone I knew who worked in finance, and what I felt at the time was, gee, the whole point of this industry was supposed to be to take the big risk so that if it works, you get to eat the big cake, and if it fails, you go down with the ship. And that was the objection held by people I knew all over the political spectrum. And so I'm struck by the fact that, you know, we may have, you know, very, very different notions of how the government should be working right now. But I think there seems to be a great deal of agreement on how it's not.
Thank you.
You know?
You're saying my statement.
And the ways in which it's not working. And I guess I would also go to you, Chris Schmidt, on this, like, is there room for constitutional review here that, you know, the not just the political parties, but certainly there's plenty of bitching and moaning from all kinds of people all the time that Congress isn't really doing its job. Is there something less drastic than a constitutional amendment to kind of boost the system into working again? I mean, it's a naive question.
No,
but
well, I don't know why we would think of a constitutional amendment that's so drastic. I mean, we do live in a culture in which indeed it would be drastic because we do it so infrequently. But we have these large structural problems with how our system works. I mean, the Electoral College, I think it's hard to defend it in modern America, the Electoral College, but yet it's going to be there for the foreseeable future because it's in the Constitution. So it would be nice if we could have a country in which we could get over the hump of thinking that anytime we touch the Constitution, it's going to be some drastic change for the worse. That would be a useful discussion, because if the government is not working effectively to respond to these moments in which we actually have some convergence, in which we have people agreeing, that kind of should suggest that the government is dysfunctional. And if we can't just sort of throw things at Congress and say, I wish you would do your job better, then we need to think about structural ways in which we can actually improve it. I will say, just getting back to the theme of what I was talking about before, a lot of things that we want, that Congress really should be doing based on how our Constitution is structured, have fallen on the courts, in part because Congress is not doing a lot of what it should be doing. And that's not a good system either, right? So there's the ways in which we're dealing with the dysfunctional system are also problematic as well, and they're worth thinking about.
I agree 100% with what you just said. 100%.
And also the Tea Party is striking because as much reverence there was for the text of the Constitution, it was actually many organizers of the Tea Party were seriously thinking about ways to change the Constitution. And again, you might not agree with the changes that some people were advocating, but they were talking about the Constitution as a fundamental document that isn't actually perfect necessarily, that it can actually be improved to better address the needs of society. It does seem to me that that would be a constructive conversation to have. And I do think we're probably going to have more of that conversation, with the court being basically less popular, more closely aligned with one side. I think that probably should be something that should come back and likely will come back.
just gonna go a little earlier, yes.
I've been in these conversations before, and people from the Tea Party or far right and people from the left try to kind of find consensus, and usually can, around issues that, you know, kind of disgust everybody, like a $500 hammer that gets sold to the military because somebody's in the military industrial complex has a special deal going. And I think it's easy to find consensus on that. And then it starts to get really hard to find consensus on what I would call more social issues. So, you know, gun control or gun rights as a constitutional right to bear arms, healthcare, health insurance, whether it's a human right for a government, for a developed nation to guarantee to its citizens, and of course, abortion. And just to pick one of those as like a starting point, it feels to me like things fell apart really, really quickly when Obama was trying, I thought, to build some consensus for recognizing that many people on the right are very, very skeptical about government-owned and controlled healthcare. So he moved away from that and tried to engage the insurance industry and people who feel like it should be a private sector provision. But as we all know from the world of car insurance, it doesn't work unless everybody participates. That's how the private sector insurance market works. And then that got thrown back by the right as, you know, you're forcing me to get health insurance and my government, you know, can't make me do that. So just using healthcare or health insurance or Obamacare as an example, I wonder what you would say to those of us in the room who, at least in what we've read or discussed with people from the Tea Party and the right, have to say about that.
There are three subjects, and I mentioned one directly to you when you first came in, that cause people to completely lose it. And that's a ladylike way of putting it. You can fill in the blanks any way you please on that. One is abortion. People are polarized on the subject. Second one is gun care, and then it goes to health care. Technically, in my opinion, it's abortion, it's gun rights, then it's health care. The Tea Party, with respect to health care, did not like the involvement of the government in health care. It was and I've used the VA for one reason. I have a lot of family that are veterans, and a lot of family. I've been involved with the Northport VA hospital. I live out on Long Island, so if I'm throwing out names, I don't mean to just like say it's Outer Mongolia. It's Northport, Long Island. It's a huge VA hospital, and I've gone in. I used to go in. I've been down on my own from an auto accident, but I used to go in on a regular basis to visit and to help out and volunteer in the center. And the people, I've known people that have waited so long to get appointments, waited so long to get help, and have gotten worse health-wise, and that bothered me. I've always been an advocate, and I'm using, again, the VA for a reason, because this is my opinion. And I would also say many of the Tea Party's opinion. I can't specifically say 100% every person, but there has to be the Medicare, Medicaid. Low-end, low-level income, low-income individuals, poor, whatever level you want to put on them. People who don't have the means to get the care need to have the care, period, end of discussion. Seniors and the veterans, okay? End of discussion. I don't look at that as a question.
Do you favor privatizing the VA?
I think it might be a beneficial alternative or an added method. You can make a choice. I know people that are military, and well, he jumped into the question, I was going to go there, that's why. I know people that are elected officials that are also still active duty, and they have not taken the congressional insurance, they keep the military insurance, not because it's better, but because they choose to not take both, because you can end up with both, which I think is a little wrong. But the idea of privatizing, in all factors, it gives you the opportunity. Do you want the VA or do you want privatized? I think the alternative should be put out there. It's a sort of a lesser of a cost, and that's the way I look at that. And a lot of people I've heard have said the same thing. Obamacare, ACA, whichever term you wish to put on it, I think it overreached, and I think the program that's out there by the mandating was wrong. I don't think that we have auto insurance. The reason that people are mandated to have auto insurance is because people drive like lunatics and ram into each other, and you better have coverage. If you live in New York, you know what I'm talking about.
People also don't vaccinate their kids, they don't take care of their health, and burden the general public with the cost that they put upon it. So that the private-public tension is always going to be there. But I don't see that saying the government is no good or we need less government is getting the government to act better.
There are many people on the far right who would like to exercise their right to not have to buy car insurance. And the government doesn't allow it. Why aren't there Tea Party protests about that? Tea Party have a fundamental angry response to a mandate for health insurance when they don't have it for car insurance.
I haven't got an answer on that, and I won't lie.
But don't you think it's really, really important? Because we need to build consensus about reforming the government in other ways that we all agree on. And if we get stuck on an issue that hasn't been thought through about, and every time I've asked this to anybody who's opposed Obamacare, they can't answer it. They were vehemently protesting against it. It's a mostly private sector plan. And I'm glad to hear you say that you support the smaller public sector part of it for indigent and elderly. I'm not even asking for consensus on that. Let's say it was just a 100% privatized plan, but as an insurance plan, it has to be, if you look at how the insurance industry stays solvent, it has to be done on an actuarial basis. We're healthy and unhealthy people.
Without subscribing to it, I can describe the way the argument would run. I mean, basically, one would say that driving is a privilege. You can lose that privilege if you don't drive correctly. And if you want to have that privilege, you need to buy into the system. And that's why car insurance is a logical outgrowth of a decision to do something, which is to get a driver's license, to get a car, and to get on the road. The argument would be that there's no equivalent act taken before you're required to buy the health insurance. The person is just living and breathing in the United States. And that is no affirmative act that then requires them to buy into a system.
Well,
that's the argument.
Well, you could implement that argument by creating like identity cards so that people who opted out of participating in health insurance would never be able to go to an emergency room. So if they got hit by a big truck on the road, whether that truck was insured or not, and needed emergency care, we would all agree to let them die on the side of the road, right? But, well, how else are you gonna do it?
Because otherwise you're not being just. You're choosing certain things to benefit yourself and denying other things that don't quite work for you.
Before Obamacare came into law, New York State, and again, I'm sticking by New York State. I cannot answer for other states, so I'm only more attuned to this state. So forgive me if I'm not talking about others. Any person can walk into the emergency room. Doesn't matter whether you're insured or not, you will get care. It wasn't a question. Anyone.
Do you know how that was paid for?
Yes.
It was paid for by private insurance
private
that
insurance.
you and I have agreed to buy.
Yes.
Right. So we can't, that's a non-sustainable model. It's a non-sustainable model to make it optional for people to have health insurance. That's why our premiums are as high as they are.
I
The
was
only
going,
way to
I was
bring them
going to
down.
say that. I was
Yeah.
about to say that. And the reason that we have, or had that, was also not just our premiums, but donors. You walk in the hospital, they've got those little plaques, donated to, the monies that get donated in. But it is an unsustainable issue, and I agree with that. I saw the fight with the Obamacare was the way it was shoved down and the way it was written and issues that were in it and the penalties and all the taxes. I mean, if you wanted to go to a tanning salon, you had to pay a tax. I mean, frankly, this is as dark a tan I'm gonna get. I've got the Irish blood in me. I don't really sit in the sun. It's not good for my skin. I'm not looking to. But some of the, in my opinion, and other people's opinion, the insane taxes and other odd anomalies that really have nothing to do with healthcare. Yes, tanning salons, cancer producing, I get that. But if you want to, that's why there are people that are standing up for repeal and redo. There are people that want it not repealed, but you're left in the street with nothing, but have a plan to follow through behind it and correct it. Now, New York State happened to have had, I'm sorry, but New York State happened to have had an unbelievable plan before Obamacare, Child Health and Family Health Plus. Our state was one of the most unbelievable, ahead of the curve states. We had a program that I had argued, why not look at this program before you look at Obamacare? Take what New York has. Have the states do their own programs and follow the New York mold. Because the New York platform, the New York program, was the best in the world, in the state. I'm sorry, in the country.
And your taxes were paying for it.
Yes, your taxes were paying for it, but what happened was people that couldn't pay for it, and it was a graduated scale. If you couldn't pay for it, and you had no insurance, and you had no means to have insurance, you were insured. If you lose your job, your children were insured. But if you have the means, you pay in, and you pay into it at a lower rate than the market. And what it did was put people into insurance pools.
That's
It was
exactly
actually a
what
phenomenal program.
Canada has, and it's called they don't call it single payer, that's exactly what Canada has, and everybody's covered. You pay according to your income. If you have a higher income, you pay more. If you have a lower income, you pay less, and everybody's covered. So isn't that what you're just saying?
That's basically what New York State had.
So you say you like that, that's a
I think it was,
government.
but it wasn't a single payer type
But
concept.
it's the same concept, it
It's
sounds like.
it's a little different from the generalized single payer to what,
It sounds, to me, from what you're describing,
from what
it
you're,
sounds
from
the
what you
same.
just described is different than what I've
Could I just
learned
make
to
a
be.
plea and not have this discussion, I'll just fall into the costs and benefits of the Affordable Care Act? I mean, I know there's a lot of other people want to get in as well, so if we can just broaden the discussion just a little bit. Yeah.
Thank you.
I just wanted to bank on something that you had said earlier, actually, about driving as a privilege and something that you have gained access to, and it can be revoked from you at any time, given the laws of the country. The same argument, I think, can be made for guns, in that guns are actually a right that has, in 2008, there was a monumental Supreme Court decision that basically guaranteed your right to own, personal right to own a gun. So it's not a privilege to own a gun in that sense, it is a right, so therefore restricting that would ultimately mean violating that person's constitutional right. In terms of how these social issues like abortion, gun rights, healthcare become the center of our focus as a population, to me, what makes them most urgent and most immediate is not the legislative process that we go through in order to talk about these constitutional issues. It's what happens in the courts afterwards. So I wanted to ask specifically, with essentially the evolution of American politics, Congress as a whole has been putting it on the court to determine the constitutionality of things that maybe we should be legislating on, like abortion, like gun rights, or gun control, gun safety, like healthcare. Because it seems that whenever these legislative issues get sort of like signed and put into law, or when they're debated about, there's always like this idea that, oh, well, we'll see what happens in the court, and then that's the final decision. I don't think that people's opinions and the social movements that exist in this country, they're not being represented by unelected officials in the court. And say what you will about the presidential election being a referendum for what kind of appointees we want the court. The president didn't appoint somebody that he thought about. He appointed somebody that was on a list of 25 people that the Federalist Society had given him. So I think there's some serious issues with our legislators not legislating on these constitutional issues when you have Roe v. Wade still like a precedent, but in states where Roe v. Wade applies, just like it applies all around the United States, you have basically women's right to get an abortion being completely taken away from them by 72-hour waiting periods, or there being 3 abortion clinics in the state of Texas, or 1 in Alabama, like stuff like that, where why are we not legislating on issues when the court decisions have expired in terms of how relevant they are to our thinking and to what people, the majority of people, or the people as a mouthpiece for, like, our power being expressed through whatever, through our vote, whatnot.
Let me agree with the big point you're making,
Yeah.
which I do think we have a problem in the country, which has actually just gotten worse over the last 70 or 80 years, about increasingly looking to the courts to tell us what our Constitution means. I just think that's a trend, which has been in some ways it's been, the reasons for that are some of them are good. A lot of that has to do with like Brown versus Board of Education, the court doing the right thing, and therefore we respect the court. But as a general approach to how we live our lives and how we relate to our Constitution, I just think the idea of legislators saying, I don't know if this is constitutional, but we'll wait that the courts tell us that, I just think that's a posture that's not good for the country. Now, in terms of legislation versus litigation, I'd say it's always a dialogue back and forth, right? All the times in which the court has weighed in on any gun regulation or any abortion regulation, they're always reviewing an act of legislation. So like the legislatures do pass a law, and then the courts review the law, and then the litigation gets renewed. So every new gun regulation will eventually get back to the court. So I actually say it's more of a dialogue of a back and forth going on here, which is, it's one way to sort of figure out what our Constitution is going to mean in effect, right? But the legislatures are doing things. And in some ways, some of the boldest legislative actions, which are really pushing against this idea of just deferring to the courts, are things like the pro-life, anti-choice movement, right? There's a lot of state legislators right now who basically say Roe versus Wade should not be the law of the land, and therefore we're going to pass restrictive abortion regulation and throw it at the courts and see what happens. Now, in some ways, that is an independent view of just saying, I disagree. I'm the legislator who's voting for this in South Dakota or whatever. I just disagree with what the court said. But then the courts need to come back and be part of that discussion. So I think it's good when people are fighting that, but then, of course, the battle lines need to be different, because just simply deferring to whatever the court says can never be the end of the story. So the Heller decision, right, is a decision about gun rights. It is just the beginning of the story. I mean, basically, it's a very limited decision, right? Basically, operable arms in the home for purposes of self-defense. All the big debates we're having about gun regulation go beyond Heller. And the question is when the court's going to get back involved in that, right? But that's a debate we should have as a society, and the courts, I would argue, should not preemptively cut that off by issuing any sweeping rulings on these questions. Thanks. Yeah, back there?
So, like, from a discussion perspective, it seems like a lot of the difficulties we have talking about this seems to be because we focus on the details so much of, like, going back to what you said at the beginning about how a lot of your stance comes from, like, specific inefficiencies in the government rather than just the government spending money in the wrong places. Like, we all agree that there should be health insurance for veterans, and yet, because as you said, like, part of the Tea Party is about like getting a collective experiential account that may be subjective of people's like dissatisfaction with how the government spends its money. That's subjective, but it still matters because those are still things happening to people. And like I have friends whose parents are in the military or law enforcement and obviously support those organizations in full, but see how like just because of bureaucratic stuff that resources get misallocated a lot, like equipment that isn't needed gets bought. Yet like the conversations we have between both sides of the aisle still comes down to like, is health insurance a good or bad thing in this really like black and white way that never works? And so is it possible that why there doesn't seem to be a lot of productive discourse about this is because so much of this topic comes down to very like specific detail-oriented stuff that could never be put into effect in a general law by Congress because it involves so many like regulatory agencies and other branches of the government that it's difficult for us to see that like your problem and ours could both be fixed just by changing a million little small rules in different branches of government that would clear up that waste.
There was one little thing I'm going to tell you what you just said was so spot on. It's impressive, and forgive me for sounding like an old lady, but I love hearing such thoughts coming from a young adult that it makes my day. Coming to the school has blown me away listening to students say things that someone with gray hair like me has lived a lifetime to get to coming out of your minds. I got goosebumps. You've blown me away by what you just said. The biggest problem isn't what we agree or disagree on, but it has to do with you've got the elected officials and the people that are in their ears dropping money and the lobbyists that are telling them to do this and the games that are going on that have created the separation from what is really needed and the size and scope of government, back to the hammer. I'm sorry if I use that as an example, but my point is the favoritism, the lobbyists, the corporations being people. No, they're not. Their involvement in government discourse have taken away from what government's really supposed to be doing. And that is one of the issues of, when I say smaller government, is get that garbage out of there. Maybe we could get the things done. And it can be handled by legislation. And the proper regulations are followed through and looked at. Okay, we would like to regulate, I'm not going to talk about hammers because you're going to look at me cross-eyed, but we're going to talk about water bottles and selling water bottles and supplying them and water in general that way. So there's going to be a bill put out that, water's got to be a certain quality to be put in called water. So
How are you going to do that without government? How are you going to not have the things people need without someone to organize?
In the decision. You can't have Poland Spring in the decision. It has to be the decision of the people. Flint, Michigan is going through hell right now with water. The government hasn't done a damn thing, and that's their job to take care of it. That's my point.
We have an announcement. Yes.
I'm sorry to cut off, but on the next talk is beginning downstairs in 2 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, we can't go, we can still continue. Regarding the healthcare, lady in the back talking about Canada, the healthcare. Excuse me, ma'am, you were talking about the Canadian issue. I love the idea of keeping that what we had, but also people have the alternative. If they don't want to do that, they can go to the public sector.
It doesn't work that way. It doesn't make sense. It's not logical. It's a nice idea, but it doesn't actually work.
Then why not sit down and find a way to make it work? I know you do, but that's the point. That's what we're trying to get the discourse.